Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. As always, a reminder to support this Rebel transmission. Best way to do that, become a paid subscriber on Substack, $5 a month, $50 a year. You can also buy me a coffee, send reinforcements via donor box. If you want to talk with me as well, you can arrange a consult via the website, geopoliticsandempire.com. And also, I'm looking for sponsors or affiliates. Rurik Skywalker of Slavland Chronicles returns to the Guerrilla transmission. His Substack, of course, slavlandchronicles.substack.com. Zdravstujte, Rurik, как дела?
I didn't expect to hear the родной язык. Thank you for having me back. I think we had a great time last time, and I'm excited to be back. Unfortunately, I'm back on such a short notice or after such a short interval because of all the bad news that occurred. So, and I think we're going to be talking about all of that. And I feel like I'm just like, if I show up, it's because something bad happened and I have to talk about bad stuff. So I'm never going to be here just to like spread the good news and the cheer, right? So,
well, that's pretty much what Geopolitics and Empire is about. We're looking at it's mostly bad news all day, every day. And maybe to start, you've got a lot of critics, which I guess is a good thing. I've got some too. And if you're not, if you're not doing your job, if you don't have criticism, I'm looking at the comments on YouTube, and there were others elsewhere, but and it's some of there's this guy called Peter Vogt who left like 10 comments, but people are saying that Rolo is kind of anti-China, xenophobic. He's a British agent. His agenda comes from London. Someone says your politics are completely aligned with Russian liberals in the West. Although I've read some of your Substacks, and you point out the Western Empire of you say London, Tel Aviv, Washington, Brussels. Thoughts on this criticism? And I also did want to ask you about. I mean, what's your sort of? I may have asked you this before. I don't remember. What's your sort of view of the Western Empire? NATO, Brussels, London, and so forth.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the criticism was that I'm a liberal. I think, right? Well, I'm not. So, in terms of what the position of the Russian liberals is in Russia, it's extremely different from what I talk about. And I don't know, like the only thing that we have in common is that I've, for a while I didn't critique Putin at all. I was saying, well, that's sort of like the standard line to take. It's that, oh, the Tsar is good. It's his ministers that are bad and they mislead him. Putin's a popular guy on the Western internet. And I was really sort of like trying not to critique him because I knew it would hurt my bottom line. And just like there are a lot of other topics that I constantly critique on my blog that I know are popular, and on some level I am trying to make some money. So when I finally actually did start critiquing Putin openly, it did cut into the bottom line. It cut in like a saw. No, the only thing I have in common with liberals is a critique of Putin, but. In America, for example, you could critique Trump either from like a liberal perspective or from a perspective of someone who's upset that he's promoting the vaccines. Like recently, he was on Truth Social and he was saying that RFK, or what is his name, Bobby Kennedy Jr. is a fraud, and he's anti-vaccine, and that's bad. And Trump is like the biggest and the bestest vaccine maker ever, and he's proud of Operation Warp Speed. You can critique him for bombing Syria. You can critique him for approving or supporting the aid package to Ukraine, and for his Zionism, his blatant Zionism. But, obviously, if you were to try and critique him from the right, these idiots, a lot of these MAGA idiots would like call you out saying, oh, you're just like Antifa. Oh, you're just like BLM. This is just a simple discreditation tactic. I have a very low, abysmal view of the masses and their cognitive capabilities, but even they can understand that there's like different positions you can take and different critiques you can have for a person. So, I take the position, it's very simple to understand, of a right of Kremlin, more patriotic than the Kremlin position. It's shared by many of the people that the blog is basically dedicated to popularizing and getting their views out, like Igor Strelkov, who we talked about last time, who's under arrest for basically saying that the Kremlin's not doing enough. And, a whole list of other people, patriots who have been disappeared, murdered, or silenced. So it's quite simple to understand my position. And I think that segues pretty neatly into the first real topic, which is the disappearance and then murder of Russell Texas Bentley. Do you want to talk about that next, or did I miss some other critique?
Yeah, I mean, I as you laid out your position, that's kind of how I sense it, and for me, you're someone who's eccentric, let's say eclectic, and these are the types of people that I want to talk to, right? I want to cover the broad spectrum, and I think we have to criticize. I think a lot of people are butthurt, and these people that are butthurt, they're Putin worshippers without. Or like you with Trump, right? For me, it's like forget Trump. This guy, you mentioned some of the criticism right there that he rolled out the warp speed and all that, and so
it's a cult. It's a cult. It's the same thing was happening when Trump started reneging on all of his promises. I supported the guy. I did a little bit more than just support him. I was pretty active in my. I was very actively supporting him on the internet. And then the idiot, or not an idiot, or the traitor, he starts pushing all this stuff that's completely the opposite of what he talked about. He completely reneges on all of his promises. And we were just like, it was just impossible to get it through to the average MAGA supporter that like, look, it's not just about this cult of personality. It's not everything that Trump does. And, for a lot of them, that's what it was. It was just a cult of personality. They just liked Trump because he was charismatic. And you try to, and, it was really difficult, especially like around the midterms, which he miserably failed. And the fact that there were just so many of these instances, like looking back, it seems like ancient history where he completely fouled up his own agenda. And each time MAGA would just scream that and cover its ears. And this is the same thing, QAnon and Xenon, and it's the same thing repeating over and over again. They just found a new prophet. That's it. Putin is basically like Trump was to the MAGA people in the first 2 years or 3 or 4 years of his popularity. And and no matter how many times he messes up, no matter how many times he blatantly fumbles or does something that is totally destructive to Russia, these people will always deny it. They will always come up with some 5D explanation for like, yeah, it only seems that way, but that's because you don't understand like the shadow moves going on. You don't understand that there's this, and they're being fed this alternative narrative that has no backing, no way to verify. It's totally faith driven. And so they've, a lot of them are religiously minded, but they're not even like following necessarily their traditional faith. They've come up with a new faith. It's like the faith of the Shadow Warrior 5D chess masters. That's what it is. And what it is also is this hubris mixed with, well, obviously arrogance and just laziness. This idea that you can just sit on your butt and watch some like clever guy dunking on the baddies, and you can just you just tune in every Friday night or whatever. It's basically this sort of serial, like passive consumer watcher voyeur culture where, and it's also this caricature of evil. Like, the bad guys are these goofy, sort of flamboyant, mustache twirling, ne'er-do-wells who are constantly getting stopped by the good guys who barely have to do anything. Everything is already, the good guys win no matter what. And they believe that with all their heart. It's like the underlying programming that they work with. And so for them, it's a given that the good guys are going to win. And who are the good guys? It's whoever they were told are the good guys. And so they tune in and they watch this guy playing his shadow checkers, his shadow tic-tac-toe, and everything bad that happens is secretly good. Everything good is actually great. And, in 2 more weeks, wait until the season finale. And then there's a cliffhanger, and then they have to wait 2 more weeks, and they wait 2 more weeks. We're 2 years into this. There's been nothing but failure on the side of Putin on everything. And these people keep coming up with new, fresh excuses to excuse inaction, just like the complete failure of any sane, reasonable strategy. And they'll keep doing it. There's not a single point at which these people will stop. Like the QAnon phenomenon proved it. a lot of them have come back because Trump is running again. It's going to be the same thing with Putin. There's just going to be this never-ending soap opera, like drama story, and if you either plugged into it or you're a traitor. Nobody who, and if I can't even quote like the regular news media. They're like, oh, so you're quoting the media, you're quoting the enemy media. It's like, this is all I have to work with. This is the media. Who are you relying on? Oh, well, I have this alternative blogger or just some voice in my head told me that, and I trust that more than I trust the media. Look, I get it. We don't trust the media, but you know what you're working with and what I'm working with. It's like, anyway, I think you get the thing. These people are very frustrating.
I feel like they're on level 1, and I don't know what level we're on, but we're levels further where it's more. I think it's actually more patriotic. You have to be able to see what Trump and Putin and others are doing and saying, wait a minute, like my other president of Mexico here, AMLO. People, the AMLovers, as they call them. Like, okay, I'll give it to them. He's done some good things. He's protected our energy. He's kept my electricity bill low. But he last week he literally said, a mainstream article in Mexican newspaper. He said, we really need to create a North American Union modeled on the EU. And it's just like, and if it was these Xenoners or MAGAs, they'd be like, yeah, AMLO, go, it's like, what? Wait, and so to move on, though, and despite some of the bad comments you get, there's people that say good stuff. Someone said, good interview, get Skywalker on again. Someone else is glad you eventually dropped the Saint Putin delusion and so forth. So Texas Bentley, I had him on the podcast a while back. Apparently he's dead now. I had Gonzalo Lira as well a couple years back. He's dead as well in Ukraine. He died in Texas. I felt he was a well-meaning guy. I didn't agree with his Marxist stuff. Whatever. I talked to everyone. He was libertarian-ish kind of, and and it was interesting talk. People can go back and check it out. But apparently they got him. And what's the story here? Do you know?
Well, the story is, there's several layers to the story, but let's start with the fact that nobody's talking about it. Have you noticed this?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like
Sputnik. I saw Sputnik mention it. Then,
Well, I would hope that his employer would mention something, but no, the big names are not. They were not concerned. They were not reporting on his disappearance, and there was nothing about what's going on with Russell. The only, it was. I still sit in some of these like Xenon channels just to see what they talk about. I occasionally pop in because they're so delusional and crazy. It's just fun to check it out. And this one channel, small channel, the guy was just blocking anybody who was asking questions about Russell until finally there was just too many questions from people about what happened to him, and he eventually allowed the letter from Russell's wife to be reposted. And he was like, yeah, it's a tragedy, but let's not dwell on it. It's bad for morale. And I don't want any idle speculation. And let's move on. Like, that's the best you could get. Like, just a short, brief mention. This is a guy who deserves a little bit more than just a sort of like, yeah, he's dead. Okay, fine. Like a grudging admission of the fact that this man was killed. If people don't know what we're talking about, Russell was a volunteer, an American who came over to fight for the Donbass rebellion. And he fought with the Vostok battalion, which is Khodorkovsky's outfit. And he lived in Donetsk, and he was a blogger, and he was covering all the stuff that was going on. Now, he had a change of heart in the sense that he started really critiquing Moscow and calling out the Kremlin for basically a lot of the stuff that we talked about last time, just this bizarre behavior, almost treacherous behavior, inadequacy, and so on. And then, and that's when I started speaking to him. I had him on twice, and I spoke with him on the phone for hours at a time. Afterwards, we were chatting for like, 2 hours after the last time that we recorded something together. And so, yeah, I think that's basically probably why nobody's talking about it, is that, first of all, yes, it's bad for morale. It's very bad PR, because now we know, or at least it seems that we know, that he was killed by in air quotes, his own side. That is, he, as the story goes, he heard there was shelling and he rushed off to see if someone needed help or something in the aftermath of the shelling. He gets there, and the 5th Tankers, which is a non-Russian, it's a Buratian division, was there, and they apparently either killed him outright on the spot, which doesn't seem likely, or they kidnapped him, and then they tortured him, and then they killed him, and then they burnt his body, and they tried to dump it in an abandoned factory. And that's where we're at right now. So a lot of people who, from the West are sort of pro-Donbass or sympathetic to the cause. This is like this is like a very eye-opening kind of difficult moment, right? And so the response has been radio silence to deny anything's been happening by these blind cheerleaders. And I think this is disgraceful. And I'm not like a lot of these people. I think were a lot closer to Russell than I was. I mean, some of these people actually lived with him, met with him, and people write to me that they have written to other personalities, other bloggers, asking them point blank to comment on this, and they've been either blocked or ignored. And then Russell's former commander, who I mentioned, Horakovsky of the Vostok Battalion, posted something about Russell, which he immediately deleted. And then he wrote an explanation saying that he was asked to delete it by higher ups because it's bad for morale. So he spilled the beans, and he said that there is a cover-up going on. And now all we have to do is just look around and see who are the people who are being quiet about this, who are not talking about this. And then we know that they're in on it. We know that they're also taking orders from higher ups, which is something that I've alleged for at least a year, that these people are clearly on the payroll. They're not independent journalists. They're not alternative bloggers. They're just state propagandists for another state. That's it. And, whatever. I think each state has a right to have its opinion and its positions heard. But I think the people are very misled into thinking that these people are somehow independent or different or just like them, when really they're no different than the Eastern version of Anderson Cooper. And their behavior with the Russell thing is just despicable. So,
or NPR or whatever. And this makes me think of the American version of this situation. And I guess there are two scenarios, maybe more. But Pat Tillman, he was this famous football player. He probably would have been an NFL superstar. And then 9/11 happens, all that, and he signs up to go fight the terrorists, and he's out in I think it was Afghanistan, and he dies. But meanwhile, I think it's very similar here. Like Bentley, Tillman had, I think, begun to question the war. Very influential figure, very tough guy, good looking, like an action hero basically, and he dies in a friendly fire incident in Afghanistan. There's a documentary made about, fantastic documentary made. I think his family backed it. I've seen it. And I think, my opinion, I think the U.S. government took him out because they can't have servicemen waking up. And what are your thoughts with Bentley? Was it just a total goof up, or was he taken out?
Well, so, I just want to try and be a little bit systematic here. The first thing we covered was that there is a cover-up, that people are being told not to talk about it. And we know it because Russell's former commander himself said it and acted it out. So, it should be obvious anyway, but there is a gag order put out about not to talk about this. Okay. So that part's now we can get into the, okay, but what really happened? I don't know. One thing that everyone knows about Donetsk is that it's completely crawling with spooks. Crawling. And Russell and I talked about this both on the podcast and afterwards for 2 hours, and where he was complaining about all these FSB goons coming from Moscow in their fancy cars, pushing people around and causing troubles and forcing people to surrender their firearms and what else? Obviously racketeering, as they always do, and causing problems that way. So, and he was talking about how I drive he was saying that he drives a very old car, and these guys, these young kids, who just finished the KGB academy are coming in there with their fancy cars, and their salary obviously doesn't allow for it, so they're stealing. Anyway, so that's what we were talking about, and he's right, it's completely crawling with spooks. But when you need them to investigate to find him, they're nowhere to be found, because his wife was giving updates once Russell went missing, and she was saying, I've been reaching out frantically to the FSB, to the spooks, trying to get the police, and no one's been helping me. And she was like reaching out. The people who seemed to be helping her were some private individuals from Wagner, and just some of Russell's old comrades who were making video appeals. So, and the thing is that I'll give some more information about this, is that lots of people die in Donbass, not just from the war, behind lines. There's so many assassinations, missing people, and everything. It's a place where you can basically kill anybody and get away with it. Like before that, there was another PMC leader, not Prigozhin. He was one of the first PMC leaders, and he went by the call sign Bereg, which means shore. His name was Mangushev, and he claims that he was the guy who came up with the Z symbol. So he claims he was the guy who popularized Z. He dies, obviously assassinated in Donbass, and the local police were involved in his assassination. We had Wagner being accused of being the ones who assassinated him because they had some sort of turf war with him. I don't know if that's true. That was just the accusation. All the militia commanders, except, by the way, Russell's former commander, Hodorkovsky, who I mentioned before, because he's an SBU spook. He's a former, air quotes, former SBU, that means Ukrainian, former Ukrainian spook that, well, actually, he never even fought for independence initially. He was just that whole thing, that him being pro Novorossiya, that came later. Anyway, I'll get back to him in a sec. Is important for the story. But all the militia commanders are dead. All of them were killed off in strange, mysterious ways. Givi, Motorola, Batman. I'm blanking. There's like 10 more, and they were there. All of them were killed. All of them. Mozgovoy, of course, and they were quite explicit that they were critiquing the authorities of the LDNR of Donbass. And you have to understand that Donbass is a very criminal region. It's been very criminal since basically forever, because it's been ruled by these crime families, these clans, oligarchic clans, most of whom are not Russian. And it's been that way since independence in Ukraine. Donbass has dominated Ukrainian politics with their assassinations, their killings, their bribery, their networks, all that sort of thing. And it's the same thing now. There have been attempts to clean things up, like Zakharchenko, who was the former head of the DNR. He was assassinated, and that one was quite obviously done by Moscow, because the person who benefited the most was an oligarch goon who put his people in charge, Pushilin, and started extracting everything that they could out of the people, not paying wages. It was so bad that eventually the Kremlin had to intervene. But obviously Zakharchenko, the populist, pro-Russian, again, popular guy, was assassinated. So what I'm saying here is that a lot of people with a lot more pull and a lot more publicity, and who are much higher up on the food chain, have been killed off in Donbass. I can literally list probably like 20 big names that have died. I can list attempted assassinations. So this is nothing new. This is not some anomaly. And the fact that it's hushed up and covered up, that's the same thing that happened the last 20 times as well. And anybody who says anything about, well, maybe we should investigate, maybe people should be brought to justice. Oh, they're traitors, They're working for the enemy. They're NATO Nazis. It's just insane. I mean, I had never expected, and the worst part is that people go along with it. Like a large chunk of people are like, yeah, it's unpatriotic to ask why our people are being assassinated and killed off, and no one's being investigated. The killers are not found. How is this possible? How does this happen? But I mean, it's not the enemy that's doing it. It's happening all behind enemy lines. Behind friendly lines. How is it? I mean, nobody wants to talk about this. Yeah.
So basically, I mean, inside job, and when you study deep politics, you realize it's not just East versus West in this case, right? It's Russia versus the collective West, right? The collective Kremlin versus the collective West, but even within, as you mentioned, Donbass within Russia, there's factions within the FSB, the intelligence agencies, the local mafias. There's infighting, between all of this stuff. But it just seems like, as you painted it, there's a much broader pattern. You write in your article on Bentley, on your Substack, most of the attention of the Kremlin has been on narrative management and social reform, not on winning any military campaigns, clearly. And it just sounds like the big picture, with so many one example after the other, that it's like they don't want to do what's right to win this war, to really advance. Like, we're not seeing examples of that. It's like they're just managing. It's sort of like keeping everything on a slow boil, instead of like, okay, let's cook the meal and let's get it over with. No, they're just, what's any further meaning for you here, or takeaway?
Yeah, you raised a perfect prompt, like perfect synchronicity. I've been about these factions that you mentioned. I've been meaning to do like a deep investigation into it. When I first started the blog, I sort of outlined my thesis, but I don't think anyone really appreciated it at the time. That one of the main splits, for example, is the GRU versus the FSB, and the GRU is military intelligence, and the FSB is basically these. The FSB is the successor to the KGB, and it was set up by the West to basically be the sort of cops, the people who make sure that no Russian populist or patriot ever comes anywhere near to power. And the FSB has a long history, or long accusations, has been accused for a long time of basically killing like every single populist Russian that may or may not have had a shot at politics. There have been a lot of generals and just populist personalities that have all died in Russia, in Putin's Russia. Before that, in Yeltsin's Russia. And someone was doing the killing. And it was almost certainly the FSB. But another element of it, like, for example, General Levit. I didn't want to talk about him today, but famous general, popular. He was over in Moldova, in Transnistrovia, and he was basically making moves that he was going to run for president, and he probably would have won in a free and fair election. Boom, his helicopter goes down under suspicious circumstances. Nobody can prove anything, but, well, Putin and his friends, for some reason, stay cozy. Now, the interesting thing is that there's this split between the GRU and the FSB, and you can read GRU materials. You can read like people who are pro-GRU on the Russian conspiracy internet, and they go pretty in depth into saying that basically the FSB's job was to destroy all sort of like serious capabilities of Russia, to destroy all the Soviet legacy, or the infrastructure, the defense infrastructure. So they were the ones, Putin and his gang were the ones who were destroying the army. So they put in, for example, Serdyukov, right, who was this grifting, thieving, despicable. Like, he was so bad that even Putin had to get rid of him. He was just stealing too much. Then he was replaced by Shoigu, the most corrupt man in Russia. And, Shoigu reformed the military along Western lines. So they took the American model of the Great War on Terror, and they basically started promoting these smaller, professional, in air quotes, units. And basically the military was in such a sorry state that when they did the SMO, nothing could be accomplished. Russia had no troops. It was a total mess. And I go very in depth on the blog, and this might come as a shock to someone who reads nothing but Xenon. But, Russia abandoned so much equipment in Ukraine in those initial days. Russia was total, like, it was just like a complete clusterfuck from beginning to end. It wasn't a feint. It was eye-opening to the West, which saw that Russia was so weak, had been so thoroughly sabotaged by Shoigu and Putin's cronies, that they could make this into a real war. Before that, they thought, Kiev would fall, and all we could do is maybe fund some guerrillas in the Carpathian Mountains or something like that. But after they saw that piss-poor performance, they said, okay, look, we can basically just make this a full-scale war. And they're right. And they continue to escalate. Ukraine continues to mobilize more and more and more men. Their army gets bigger. It gets more equipment. And obviously, this is like all these facts I'm saying right now, this is like a slap to the face of everybody who believes in this Putinanon nonsense. In the meantime, Russia just continues to bleed men. And well, anyway, one of the main things that the initial failure of the SMO was because the FSB, who was charged with it, it was their task. They messed it up, and you can find articles about this in the Russian media about how there was something called the Fifth Department or the Fifth Service. They were in charge of Ukraine, so the FSB was given Ukraine. They were told, okay, we want you to keep tabs on it. We don't want to lose Ukraine. They lost it. They basically embezzled all the money. They came up with these like fake networks of like pro-Russian patriots. They told Putin that there would be popular uprisings. And that's why they called it the SMO, is because they said, oh, well, we can park basically some Spetsnaz units on the outskirts of the city, and then internal agents will activate. They'll seize power or whatever. They'll open the gates to the city, and then we'll just roll in, and the people will welcome us with flowers as liberators. Right? That's basically the narrative that we were sold within Russia, and that Putin himself was told, and it was a complete failure from top to bottom. So he ends up firing the guy who was in charge of the Fifth Service, and he puts the GRU back in control. I don't know if that's still the case now. They may have swapped it, but there's basically it gets more interesting. So Wagner, right? Wagner led a mutiny on Moscow. I know that Zianon denies that anything happened. Oh, it was nothing. It didn't exist. You're a Nazi if you think that Wagner marched on Moscow. But it did happen, and Wagner was pretty much a project of the GRU. And the main commander, the actual like Prigozhin, was the money man. He was the connection. You see, Putin only has dealings with criminals and with non-Russians, and so Prigozhin, being half chosen and half criminal by ethnicity, he was the go-between. He was getting the money. He had the connects. He was the one who was in Putin's inner circle, and but the actual organization itself was GRU. So what I'm saying is that there's like a lot. If you understand that there's a little bit more about the FSB, a little bit more about the GRU, all of a sudden this war and all these things, they become a lot more nuanced and clearer. So you can, if you know about the Fifth Service of the FSB, you know who was in charge of the initial SMO, and you might have some suspicions as to why it failed, because the FSB is a treacherous organization. If you understand what the GRU is and their relationships, then you understand why Wagner may have done an attempted coup on Putin because of this conflict. And there's all this stuff that we can get into. I don't know, it's a little bit detailed, but there is this split within Russia between the GRU and the FSB, and the GRU has historically been weaker. And if you believe the materials of former GRU members themselves, they've been in a clandestine, they've been basically getting destroyed by Putin's government for the last 20 years. They've been being shuttered up. Their operations, the FSB, according to the GRU, leaks like dozens of high-profile spies and assets and agents that were operating in places like South America or whatever to the Western press. This was in 2017. I think it was the Humpty Dumpty affair. They accuse the FSB of all sorts of things, of human trafficking, drug trafficking, which is that's just undeniable. I mean, everyone understands that the FSB runs the drug trade in Russia, of undermining the Donbass rebellion, of assassinations of these populist leaders, as we've covered before. So yeah, what you said about these different factions, if people were interested in that, you know, maybe I would write more about it. I'm fascinated by it. I love reading into this sort of thing. I've known a little bit about it since I was young because I was told about it by my family. But you know, I've noticed that people do not want to hear about this. They don't want to hear. I think it's fascinating, but they don't want to hear about the GRU versus the FSB. They don't want to hear about, did you know about this general who was assassinated? Did you know about this GRU asset who was leaked on by the FSB that died in Syria while he was out for a swim? You know, like all this stuff, they don't want to hear. Has that been your experience? I don't know. It's frustrating for me. You're like the only guy I can talk to about this.
I mean, again, I'm bringing back the parallel to America, and I wasn't even planning this. Pat Tillman just came to mind, and just today, Eric Prince published an article, and it fits into what you're talking about. And I got it. It was from a tweet from one of my regular past guests, Lee Slusher, who's worked in the as an intelligence, I think, officer, and he's agreeing with Eric Prince. And again, this doesn't mean I think Eric Prince is a great guy, or whatever. It's again, it's going back to that Xenon MAGA that you gotta have nuance, you gotta read everything. Eric Prince is an important figure, love him or hate him, right? And so he's saying he even mentions Wagner and Russia in this article published today on im1776.com, and he's talking about how the American military industrial complex and the neocons keep America losing. So it's just kind of like the same type of stuff that's happening in what you're outlining in Russia. That same type of stuff is happening in the U.S., maybe to different degrees. And I did want to ask you about Shoigu real quick, because you mentioned, and Riley wrote a piece on, is Putin going to sack Shoigu? Do you think that could happen?
Well, and that's just the perfect example of what I'm talking about, these internal divisions. So when Wagner was screaming, when Prigozhin was screaming at Shoigu, we were told this was all theater. Remember that? Oh, this is, don't pay attention to it. It's nothing. You're a traitor if you believe that there's actually any substance to this. Don't pay any attention. And they could get away with it because no one was doing the translating work except me. I'm the only guy in the entire world, turns out, that was translating Prigozhin's rants about Shoigu. And it turns out that actually it was real, this conflict. It led to an attempted mutiny, right? And so one of the problems that they were having was, it was actually related to this guy. It's this deputy, Timur Ivanov, who is like one of the biggest thieves in Russia. And he has this, everyone's known about this. I mean, these reports have been out for many years where, I mean, he's got obscene amounts of wealth. And his salary is nowhere close. It's like 1% of the amount of money he's spending. And his wife and his family, they all live in the West. And he gets awarded all these contracts for like the reconstruction, say, of like Mariupol or something. And all the money just goes straight into the pockets of his wife. And, and this is where I get accused of being a liberal. But the liberals did do an investigation of his wife. And all they did was they went on her Instagram and she was like buying $900,000 earrings. She was spending more than $100,000 a month in like rent on like different fancy hotel rooms. She was, like just buying obscene amounts of things in Europe while the SMO is going on. And I mean, yeah, that's kind of a crazy situation, isn't it? That basically the second in command, or at least one of the top defense officials in Russia, has a wife who's in Europe while this crusade against anal Nazism, Satanism is going on. She's spending ungodly amounts of money publicly. And by the way, she's publicly anti-Russian as well. Oh, and by the way, she's part of an ethnicity that also seems to dislike Russia. Anyway, I won't say more. But she's not Russian. Let's just put it that way. Just all these weird, and you're not allowed to talk about it. Of course, I talked about it. I've written about this guy. I was one of the reasons why I even began writing in the first place was I was like, oh, okay, so here we go. There's going to be a war. It's going to be serious. And if you're going to fight a serious war, it means you got to get serious. It means you got to fire a lot of people. This guy's got to go. Shoigu's whole thing, his whole operation, his rat's nest of thieves and crooks and traitors has to be cleared out. And I wasn't the only one that thought that. I was talking to conservatives in Russia, taking interviews at the time because I was still in Russia. And they were all saying, oh, yeah, Shoigu's definitely going to get fired. Well, I mean, yes. So his deputy, his right-hand man who was helping him steal obscene amounts of money, he got in trouble and he's facing 15 years. I'm sure he'll only serve like 2 or 3. And that's good. Riley's article, he wasn't like really definitive on whether or not Shoigu got fired, but the fact that it's sort of proof of what like Prigozhin was saying before he was assassinated by Putin and Shoigu. It's that like, yeah, these people are stealing so much money that should be sent to the front to the soldiers, and I mean like. But the thing is that you weren't allowed to notice that. You weren't allowed to talk about that until the arrest happened. Now, people like Martyanov and all these people are like, oh, yeah, this is proof of like the patriots are in control. This is great. We told you this is what I'm talking about. This is why Russia's so much better than the West. But it's like, well, yeah, but we've known about this for 8 years at least. We've known about this for so long. And when I spoke about it, when other people, when Strelkov wrote about it, you denounced him as a traitor. It's against the law to talk smack about the Ministry of Defense. It's called discreditation of the army. You can go to prison for it, apparently. You know what I mean? It's just like the convolution and the obfuscation is so obscene. It's basically the whole goal of it is that you either have connections and then you're allowed to speak at the right time in the right way when you are given the signal to do so, or you're just not allowed to speak at all, and there will be consequences for you. And we'll call you all the worst names ever. We'll call you a Nazi. We'll call you a traitor. We'll call you everything just for saying something earlier than it's supposed to be said. And in that sense, Russia's no different than the West. In some ways, it's actually worse.
You're right.
I think
on your Substack, you wrote something interesting. You write, quote, "It's clear to me that the Putin project is a Western Trotskyite Zionist occupation government designed to make sure that no patriot gets anywhere close to power and reverses the de-Russification policies engineered by Putin and his predecessors. Kiev is the same, of course, but at least they don't make any effort to hide this." And again, I feel like this same formula, it's the same thing in the US. If you're like a real patriot, calling out of course, the Biden regime, and calling out the Trump regime, calling out RFK for certain policies, then you get into trouble. And so just your further thought then on is that it then? It's basically a facade, and basically we don't really have much hope from the Kremlin to do the patriotic.
Well, that's like, yeah, but that's like so obvious and so ground level. It's like, yes, like you need to know that to begin with. That's like ABCD. Like, can you imagine? Like, there's people who honestly think that like geopolitics is about goo goo gaga. I'm the good guy, you the bad guy. It's like, what are we talking? No, there's. I know they're the vast majority. They see everything as a morality play, and for them, it's about figuring out who is the more moral. And so if I point out that the second in command of the Russian MOD has a wife who hates Russians and spends literally hundreds of millions of dollars in Europe while the war is going on, and his kids and the kids of every single major Russian official live in London, I'm undermining the moral legitimacy of the Kremlin. I don't see the world in that way. I'm not a retard. I don't think of things in terms of these ridiculous morality plays. So when they get all upset at me for doing that, it's like, listen, you're upset at me because your worldview is retarded. I have nothing to do with that. That's the way I see it. Now, okay, is the Kremlin? No, the Kremlin has it's a gang of oligarchs, okay, and it's a coalition of spooks and crooks, okay? And yes, they have concrete goals, and some of these goals do not align with the Western elites. And where they don't align, there's going to be friction and there's going to be conflict. And that's pretty much it. That's what's going on here. Now, as we add more nuance to it, like what I'm interested in and what any sane person should be interested in is not the morality plays. Mm-hmm. It's in actually figuring out the nature of these regimes. So, when I'm looking into the whole GRU versus the FSB thing, or trying to figure, or if I figure out that both Trump and Biden are compromised and they're basically serving the same masters, that's, I guess it undermines the morality narrative, but it does bring me closer to truth. Mm-hmm. It does give me greater insight into what's going on. So in Russia, I would say in terms of patriotic factions, there is no patriots in power, period. If you have any patriotic inclinations whatsoever, you're not allowed anywhere near power. People need to explain to themselves, and I will get around to, I've been sort of charting the history of what happened in the Soviet Union and the Zionist takeover pretty meticulously. But the next article I'm going to write is about Andropov, and that's really where the current occupation government started. It's everything from Andropov onwards is basically a continuation of the same thing. And with Putin, he's a continuation of Yeltsin, who was a continuation of the work taken to destroy the Soviet Union as a sort of a competitor, as an alternative to the West. And you can't understand Putin without understanding that he's part of this project. That's why would they have picked someone who was against everything that they had built, everything that they had destroyed, right? This idea that Putin's the secret patriot. How? Like, how is this possible? Like, why is it that the globalists all thought that he was their guy? And you mentioned this site, 1776 or whatever, and there's a couple of them. There's the Unheard. Mm-hmm. And this site that you mentioned, and there's a small faction within the American elite, which it used to include Burns. Actually, Burns was in it. Tucker Carlson, Jeffrey Sachs, and who are some other? Mearsheimer, Lutwake used to be in it, and basically it was these pro-Putin types. And their argument was really simple. They were like, guys, we're the ones that put Putin into power. I mean, Jeffrey Sachs was literally the guy who was sent in to Russia in the 90s to loot the economy and to destroy it and to make it basically a gas colony, right? And so you have all these like old Cold Warriors, or like these old people who understand, and Tucker's dad was like a CIA agent working against Moscow, right? And they're like, look, Putin's our guy. Like, we put this guy in charge. Why are we? He's supposed to be our ally against China. He's supposed to be the guy. It's Russians that are supposed to die in the next war. We don't want to lose too many American soldiers. We want to get some meat fodder to fight for us. So why are we antagonizing Russia when when we're the ones that set up the system? We designed their constitution. We designed their economy. We selected all their politicians. And now we're telling everybody that they're the enemy. This doesn't make any sense. And they're the minority, but there is a faction within even McGregor or Ritter and all these people. They're all part of this faction. And I guess I'm against war, obviously, with Russia, and I'm for peace. And I think this is all a travesty, and I would like for Americans and Russians to get along. But again, we have to get rid of this stupid morality goo goo gaga nonsense. The reason why Jeffrey Sachs is pumping the brakes on war with Russia isn't because he's found his moral backbone or he's had a coming to Christ moment. It's because that's his baby. Putin is his project, and he knows the score. And it's not a morality tale. It's if you look a little bit deeper, dig a little bit deeper into every morality tale, you'll find that there's actually hidden motivations, hidden machinations actually going on. It's not about like great morals or great strength of character or whatever. People need to grow the fuck up. I mean, Jesus Christ, I can't say anything without these people getting all huffy at me. It sucks. But I mean, this is why we're in the situation that we're in. Like, what percent of the peasantry can even hear a little bit of tough love, can even hear the message? They kill the messenger. They certainly don't financially support the messenger. And then each time they it's like Charlie Brown trying to kick the football. They get tricked again and again and again, and they can never seem to figure it out. And they just get angry or more huffed up. And then they think it's the other side that's like the reason why everything sucks. It's like, oh, those libtards, oh, those Republicans. It's like, guys, get a brain. Like, try and actually figure out what's happening with politics. Try and learn the names. Try and understand. But it's whatever. I'm whistling in the wind here.
Yeah, and I like what you said about, and that's what I try to do, to get as close to basically. I'm not here to provide solutions. Really, one of my guests said, I'm a chronicler of our time, and I'm just here to figure out what in the world is going on, observe, sort of chronicle, get as close as you say to understanding the nature of all of these different regimes. What do they want to do to us, right? Why? I had on recently Serbian Canadian John Bosnic, who had personal interactions with good old Zbig Brzezinski and the late Henry Kissinger, and he related a story. And it's related to what you were saying. Like, this is how politics really works. And he was saying, he was in a room in the early 90s in Japan where there were the four candidates for the political party, and they gave speeches, blah, blah, blah. Kissinger didn't even listen to them. Kissinger just walks right in and puts his arms around one of the candidates who just happened to end up being the prime minister. And Vosenich was saying, it's as simple as that. This is how politics is.
Well, that's what happened with Putin. That's what happened with Putin. He was literally tapped by Kissinger. That's why Kissinger got this hero's welcome every time he'd come to Moscow. Kissinger, people, come on, wake up. Do we not know who Kissinger is? Why is he so beloved in Moscow? He's the guy. He's literally the guy who picked out Putin. He was like, we need a guy. And Putin was recommended by a guy called Primakov, real name Finkelstein, a cousin of Kissinger, except he worked for the eastern side. He was on the other side of the Iron Curtain. And between Finkelstein and Kissinger, they figured out who the next leader of Russia is going to be. It was Putin. So, yeah, that's how it works. And, and people get all upset about it. It's like the reason why you're upset about it is because you live with these false assumptions about society and your place in it. You are a peasant. You are a serf. You are a slave. And it has always been that way. And if you were to analyze medieval society, did the peasants have a say in what war was going to happen? Was there morality involved in the war between one lord versus another lord over some manor or some land or some cows that were stolen? No. And no one was under any illusions about it. But now they came up with all this convoluted morality nonsense, trying to say that, we're better than we were in the past. These things are in the past. Everyone has a say, whereas citizens, whatever, democracy. And that's why you're all upset about it. You shouldn't be upset at me or at anyone else trying to wake you up to the truth. You should be upset at the people who pulled the wool over your eyes. There's always going to be a ruling caste. In medieval Europe, it was a little bit more honest. It was the people walking around in armor with big swords, okay? Nowadays, I say it's the spook ruling caste. You have to be a spook to have an opinion, to be in the game at all. You look at all we talked about this last time. Look at all the personalities involved in the media, in shaping public opinion, in politics for the most part. It's all former spooks. In Russia, especially, it's all spooks. I mean, you can't find anyone who isn't affiliated with some organization or another. So if you understand that, it behooves you to try and then figure out, okay, well, what are the real political fault lines? What are the real divides within society? It's not about morality in Russia. It's not about who can use what toilet. It's not about who can bake what cake. It's not about what you ram up your ass or not. It's about who runs what factories, who controls, or it's ethnic. There's an Armenian mafia, which is very bloody. There's a Georgian mafia. There's an Azerbaijani, which is the worst of them all. And they have their own ethnic interests and they have their own scheming, and then you all of a sudden terrorism starts making more sense to you. You're like, oh, okay, so these attacks are related to these ethnic mafias, and they're playing a game, they're sending messages, and then anyway, a lot becomes clear when you start forgetting about these stupid morality tales about that you're fed in America, especially, and just start looking at what politics is really about. Figure out the factions, understand how power really works, understand how these networks are built, how compromat works, how blackmail works, how for white people this is very hard to understand, but yes, ethnic ties are important. Understanding the ethnicity of somebody is important to understand their loyalties. Figure out what ethnicity someone is, even if you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to notice that guy's an Armenian, and for some reason all of his friends and supporters are Armenians, and for some reason he supports Armenian interests, even though he lives in Russia and speaks Russian. Isn't that interesting? What about the Azerbaijani guy? Or God forbid, I should name the most taboo group of people of all. I shan't. But that's how you should be thinking about things. You should be seeing past the stupid morality drivel. It's not about good guys versus bad guys. It's about, it's about identity, really. People are not just people. They don't identify with you. They see you as meat. They see you as prey. Who are they? There are different identities, but the key thing is that they see themselves apart from you in some way. So anyway, that would be my big overview. But people just no, impossible.
Yeah.
I lost them 20 minutes ago.
No, I mean, this is what I do on the podcast, and you just made me think of. I stumbled on a fascinating Chinese think tank last night, and there was someone to be looking into that further. They had an interesting piece on digital multipolar currency. Basically, it's outlining how they're going to bring the two worlds together, the BRICS multipolar system and the West, to one big happy digital global gulag. But there was another piece, and it's you got to wade through some of these really boring academic sort of drivel. But again, my question, just one final thought on that before just moving on, as to, it's not what they tell us it's about. It's, as you outlined it, I think it's about these power structures that have been around for a long time, these dynasties, these families. So it's about power, economic, right? Wealth, right? Power and money. That's the classic thing. And other, perhaps, I think you alluded to as well, esoteric agendas, ideologies, right? You mentioned identity, occult stuff, even, and to get any further thought of yours on that. And I think it also comes down to world government. Since forever, I've been saying everything comes down. They want a world empire. They want to control the world. And this guy in this boring article, just read real quick. He says, when it comes to geopolitical rivalry and risks, the connection is often made with military conflict. They can also manifest in other ways that are just as disruptive. These may include issues related to resource access, territorial control, ideological differences. And then here he says, again, what I've been saying for like decades now, the imperative for robust global governance, world government. And he says, over time, conflicting viewpoints surrounding the impacts of globalization and geopolitical competitions have coexisted. However, these disagreements have recently heightened dramatically, diminishing the effectiveness of the global system. And for me, kind of, it's that we've been trying to square that circle where there is this apparent geopolitical conflict, but at the same time, Russia, the East and West both implement these globalist agendas. So it just seems like they're fighting over who's going to sit where at the table. They've got these slight different disagreements. And any further thought on that?
Well, I don't know. You're on something about us today. There's some synchronicity going on here, because two bits of news I can tie into the question you asked. One, Dugin had an interview with Tucker Carlson. Did you see it? I just watched it this morning. Yeah. Well, if we want to talk about occult agendas and ideologies, let's take a look at what Mr. Dugin has to say. Now, Dugin, in his recent interview with Tucker Carlson, he advanced a very simple point. It's one I've actually made on the blog quite a bit. It's that liberalism seeks to liberate, it seeks to create this mythical individual that is free from all non-elective identities. So liberalism frees the so-called individual from his family, from notions of male, female, from the nation, from the clan, from the tribe. And so, and it uses, he didn't get into this, but it uses technology, uses social engineering to basically fight against human nature, to basically create this super individuated person who has full choice or full autonomy. And everything that gets in the way of that is called nowadays fascism. So, if you say, well, look, I have family obligations, I have obligations to my nation, or I have a clan, I have a tribe that I should be loyal to first. I can't just sacrifice. I can't just be an individual. I have, I can't just change my pole. I am a man. I was born a man. There's some significance to my identity that's innate, that I cannot change, it's not, this will to freedom, this will to total individuation. It's not for me. That's all fascism, right? I mean, that's what's called, if you're against this sort of thing, you're against freedom, you're a fascist, right? So Dugin got into that, and that's interesting. There's an occult element to this that he didn't get into, but he does in some of his books. The idea of the extreme individuation, it's fundamentally, it's an esoteric idea. It's something related to soul concepts, just like, for example, transgenders. It's the Wachowski brothers, the guys who made the Matrix films, they became transgenders. And in Gnostic, or not even just Gnostic, there's all sorts of occult thinking where basically angels or ascended beings are hermaphrodites. They're a mix. They have both female and male characteristics. I think even in Christianity, the angels exhibit these characteristics. Now, what they've done is they've taken these ideas and they've crudely tried to materialize them. So if a higher being is a mix of both the male and the female pole that have been reunited on a higher level through some sort of karmic or cosmic bond, well, what they want to do is they want to chop someone's dick off and so on another piece of the body and make it this like crude imitation in this material fallen world. So a lot of these concepts that, like, you know, if you actually read some of the authors who were thinking out liberalism, you'll find a lot of occult thinking about this super supreme free individuated individual. You could say on some level it's very Luciferian. It's like a rebellion against everything that you are born with, right? So you were born to a nation, you were born to a tradition, and you're saying, no, 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 I'm in total rebellion. I can choose just for the sake of it. I reject all of it. And the extreme individuation is also, I don't want to get too into it, but anyway, yes, there is an occult element to it. And another aspect of it is that with Dugin's stuff, he wrote another book, and it was about how in the future we have to create an order of like Bolshevik, Templar, occultists who are going to like be the shadow government and everything. And they're going to be like, I mean, yeah, that's what he wrote. He wrote like that. Basically, we need to create this sort of like shadow Bolshevik secret society running things. And it's like, you know, Dugin is basically outlining what is already being done, and he's sort of providing some sort of ideological veneer for it. Even though I like a lot of the stuff that he has to say when he's critiquing liberalism, he's a Platonist. Actually, his daughter, rest in peace, was a Platonist as well, and they're really into what the Platonic idea is. And we've talked about it, I think, before. It's this idea that there's this philosopher king or guardian caste, which is basically a secret police, ideological enforcers, an inquisition that's sort of lurking in the shadows, kind of like a dark Jedi order. And that's what Dugin's into. That's what he's talking about. And so he thinks that he can like cut a deal with the powers that be, and I guess his problem is that the already the existing secret police structures, he wants them to believe in what he believes in, basically, and he wants them to become more like him. But I write about this a lot on the blog. The core idea of Platonism and what Plato was writing about was creating a totalitarian society and creating this class of overseers who operate in secret and create a kind of ideological terror. And that idea is sort of the core of a lot of occult movements, a lot of these secret society movements. Maybe their beliefs have been tweaked over time. Maybe the robes that they wear have changed, but fundamentally the same techniques and the same structure of society. You get it explained beautifully in the first truly dystopian novel of the 20th century, in Zimatin's We or Me, where he basically explains that Plato's Republic is the ideal totalitarian hell state. And so, you know, until we kind of understand some of these ideas and sort of say, do we want to be ruled over by secret police who have these ideological codes and have these weird beliefs that we're never 100% sure of, and for some reason they feel like they have to hide them from us because if we ever knew, you know, we'd misunderstand or we wouldn't appreciate it. I think anyone who's telling you that they know 100% what the occult elite believe in, unless they're like an insider themselves, I think they're misguided. But I think the structure of it and the intention of it, even if we don't know the details of it, it's pretty clear, and it's been there since Plato. And you know, that would be my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, that's one of my obsessions here in the podcast, trying to get as close to that as possible. And just one other thing that bugs me is you mentioned them before, these sort of Western multipolar apologists, the ones that never have they're just cheerleaders. And it just, do you have any thought on on.
Well, I mentioned two things about the occult thing. Another example of weird occult nonsense being perpetrated was the terrorist attack in Moscow, in Crocus. And did you know? I just found this out yesterday, that it was the Crocus City Hall was apparently a meeting place for the GRU. I was reading these articles from 2010, and they were talking about GRU meetings in Crocus Hall. Anyway, there was a lot of occult significance to the attacks, which, if Dugin wasn't a shill and sold out, he might, the guy knows his stuff. He could have explained a lot of it. Instead, the task falls to me on my humble blog. But the date, 3/22. Well, I mean, that's just like basic. Everyone knows about that date, right? I mean, we're talking about, just simple Masonic symbology here. And the fact that so many of these massive terror attacks occur on that date, I mean, what are the odds? There's like a whole list on Wikipedia of all the massive terror attacks that have occurred on this date. And that's interesting. And for some reason, this one was also on the eve of Purim. And Purim is this holiday by a group of people. And there's this tradition associated with ears, with the cutting off and eating of ears. And when this is in the Bible, it's in the book of Esther. And so that's what happens on Purim. And to this day, they bake the ears of Haman and they eat them symbolically, ritually. If you know the story of what was done in the book of Esther, you'll also understand that the book of Esther is the founding ideological document of the Mossad. And maybe I'll get to that a bit later. But the key thing is that the attacks occur on a very symbolic date. And when the alleged perpetrators are caught, the people who catch them, you know this, right? They chop off the ear of the killer, and they try to force him to eat it. Like, what are we talking about here? And so anyway, and then there's this mysterious fire that breaks out. So I wrote all about the weird stuff that happened around the Crocus attack. Most of the people that died in the fire, and we know that these fires are Holocaust. They're burnt offerings. And how did the fire start? Why is there no video of it? Why does the timeline not work? Why are all these spook agencies in, around, or nearby, but not close enough to intervene in this affair? Why are religiously symbolic things being publicly done and then shown to the public, which 99% of people won't understand the meaning of the ear or the dates that were chosen? So, all this weird stuff. I saw the attacks as being very occult related. And I think that it was done by the Azeri mafia. And of course, nobody. I wrote an article about how there's this guy, an Orthodox American, who moved to Russia, who's this big guy who writes about. His whole thing is that the Western media doesn't want you to know about the real Russia. I write about the real stuff in Russia. He wrote nothing about this event. I think on the day that the terrorist attacks happened, or right after, he was writing about how Russia was so cool because they were banning Harry Potter from classrooms or something. No mention from Father Gleason of this horrific massacre of Russians, the second worst terrorist attack in Russia's history. And you go down the list, and none of the Xenon people talked about it. We talked about the Russell Bentley cover-up. This is the same thing. The Crocus thing was not covered. It wasn't. None of this information was presented to the Xenon audience. None of them will admit that there might be occult groups in Russia very close to the power. What they won't explain what the ideology of the FSB is. They won't explain that it's weird. Yeah.
On that point, the folks from World War Now, they posted something which I shared about this at the time, that the rock band that was playing was very into the occult, as you mentioned today. So it seems like we could almost discount again this binary that we're presented. Is it a Russian false flag in the classical sense? Is it a Western false flag? Right? Was it the West? ISIS. It's not, I don't think it was.
Well, they tried to blame the Ukrainians, but then Lukashenko came out and he was like, the only piece of evidence was that they were fleeing to Ukraine, and he was like, no, they weren't fleeing to Ukraine. They were fleeing to Belarus. And that was the only evidence that they had. And where's the follow-up? It's been months. Where is the follow-up? Where is this? Where is the, like, it's just totally disappeared. Nothing happened. There was no mutiny in Moscow. There was no massacre in Moscow. Nothing happened to Bentley. Nothing happened to all these people. You're crazy. Isn't that nothing? It's all good, man. You're just crazy. You're just conspiracy theorists.
So would it be yeah? So would it be like then? What just came to mind for me was, as you outlined, was this some sort of like the Eastern wing of occult globalism, doing some ritual, trying to gain magical power for their endeavors? You mentioned this Azerbaijan with like oligarchs. Like, what do you think would have been the purpose for this?
Well, look, I mean, a lot of it came out, I think, with the. Well, so I mean, I have my own perspective on it because. So I had a podcast which got shut down. Well, canceled, I guess, in Russia, and we were involved with like the Russian media, talking to people. And my partner, he got much further than I did because for various reasons. And he would just like reach out to me, and he would tell me, so yeah, I was meeting with the guys who are running this studio, and the people who are the agents of this actor, and so and so. And it's like, yeah, they're all occultists. Like they all practice like some version of Freemasonry. They all meet with like on a checkerboard. Like with the floor tiles being black and white.
That's what my previous guest John Bosnich told me as well. We got into this, and he was working around these politicians. He said the same thing: Freemasonry everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, Freemasonry is like the basic stuff. I mean, Prigozhin was into that as well. He was building black cubes everywhere. He was building dark black cubes and he was building black pyramids on top of the bodies of the dead Wagner soldiers. And the liberals talked to some of the prostitutes that he slept with, and they were talking about like some of the weird stuff that I wrote an article about it, like about these, and that's normal. I mean, you talk even to like business people or like Wall Street traders, they believe in all of it. I mean, they've got like crystals, and they see fortune tellers. I think this is like, maybe it's eye opening. I think the peasants are being told to be secular, when the elites actually understand that this stuff is to some extent real, and they do practice it. You can read like this is such an open secret in Russia. I mean, the number one like author, Pilevin, he wrote, there's a movie which you guys could watch if you really wanted to get acquainted with it. It's about Putin's rise to power and the propaganda surrounding it. It's called Generation P, and it's based on the true story of this guy called Serdyukov, real name Dadaev, who was like the PR manager for Putin, and who basically created this product, this Xenon product of Putin being this, basically a messianic figure, a prophetic messianic figure, a god, a sort of half god in the eyes of many people, and how they achieved this. And you can read this guy's books about what the elites were up to. I just had someone come visit me from Russia, an old friend, and she was telling me about how when she was younger, she was dating this guy who was a big shot in the Kremlin, and she would go to Rublyovka, which is like it's like what I guess it's not like K Street, but like I don't know, maybe some street in Georgetown or something where the elites in America get together. Is there an equivalent in Mexico, like the elite area, whatever, the elite area in Moscow? She would go there, and she would go to ayahuasca parties, and they were inviting like Peruvian shamans and stuff, and they were really getting into all this. And she was explaining to me that they were all into it. And she said that she met the deputy minister of such and such, and she met the like not like top tier, but high enough that they're like pretty high up. And she was talking about like how they were all, and the thing is that it totally matches with popular literature in Russia, like popular shows in Russia. Again, read Pilevin, read his books about the Russian elite. They're in English. There are movies that you can watch with English subtitles, like Generation P, Generation Putin, and it's the same stuff. It's like they're into their cult. They dabble in it. Some of them understand it more than the others. Basically, there's like an underlying Freemasonic like basic layer to it. They create these occult organizations. The FSB is an occult organization. There's no way that all of these secret police organizations are occult organizations. They have occult beliefs. And the FSB is like a mix of like esoteric communism, like it's Kabbalah, and some sort of like esoteric Orthodox Christianity, obviously mixed with Freemasonry. They go to these there's this island thing in the north, and that's where the FSB will send some of their recruits. Strelkov was there. Ozzy Cossack, the criminal from Australia, who like beat up some old woman and had to hide out in the consulate, who got citizenship recently, who I had an interview with. I mean, he's pictured also meeting with these people on these islands. And it's in the north. It's north of St. Petersburg. And there are these monks there, and Putin's really into it. And they go there, they hang out with them, they hear their prophecies or whatever. They do some initiation thing. And now they consider themselves like Orthodox warriors with communist symbology, and it's an eclectic mix. But the main thing, again, the details of it, I could not tell you 100% true. I can give you like 80-85% the gist of it, just from the people I know who worked in the media, the people I know who dated people who were on the Rublyovka, just reading the literature put out by Russia's like top artist, who, by the way, never had any problems publishing his books about the drug-filled orgies and binges and crazy shit that the Russian elite got up to, because they wanted the world to know. It's a revelation of the method, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And they know that only a small percentage of people will even understand what is being told and will be able to even comprehend what is being revealed to them. They understand how dumb people are, I think. Like, you could tell them to their face all this stuff. They still won't believe you, But the long and short of it is that if you actually open your eyes to the possibility of holocausts, like burnt offerings, it's kind of weird that Prigozhin was using these black pyramids for I would assume most of the people that fought for him were not into that, so they probably have preferred a cross or like a regular gravestone. Why was he putting them under black pyramids? Why was he building black pyramid temples? You go down the list, and there's a lot of this. Just like start anywhere, start with any major guy, like the guy who runs Russia's bank, Herman Gref, out and out Kabbalist, talks about how everyone should do Kabbalah. The number one TV presenter in Russia, Kabbalist as well, literally sells Kabbalah courses, like how to do Kabbalah, how to get into Kabbalah, like promotes it. It's just Solovyov, aka Shapiro. I can't think of one major personality in Russia that's not into some sort of occultism. I can't think of any one. Like, I mean, they're all into it. So anyway, long story short.
Yeah, I mean, going forward, I'm going to be trying to explore that with guests in the future as well on the podcast. And then I guess just getting back then to Ukraine, big picture, Zelensky got what, 60 plus billion from Washington again. It feels like
they told us it was over. They told us it was over. How many times have they said, "Oh, that's it"? Like they're going to dump him. They're going to abandon him. He's never going to get the money. It's over. Just wrap it up. It's all a lie. Of course, he's going to get the money. It's every single time they're like, Ukraine is on its last legs. It's not on its last legs. Yes, there's some debate. This is the perfect thing that we're talking about, right? There is squabbling over how much money, over who gets what of the money, right? Mm-hmm. And it's presented to us as if there's like some real resistance in the West to like this war, or like giving Zelensky the money, right? Like it's like a real debate. It's in the newspapers. Like, oh, will he get the money? Won't he get the money? And the patriots and like the people who are against the war, they're like, they're like, aha, you see, we're sick of it. He's not going to get the money. This is proof. And they're just dumb. It's obvious he's going to get the money. It's obvious that the war is going to continue because they're winning. Because every single day that the war continues is another, dead Russian on either side of the conflict. Weakened enemies, money that's laundered, weapons that are produced, and occult possibilities as well, I'm sure, with the amount of suffering that they've unleashed. So all the people who keep saying that it's going to be over in 2 weeks, forget about it. It's going to keep happening. They're going to make a big debate in the media. Oh, will he get the money? Won't he get the money? Oh, well, by the nick of his hair, he got the money. Yeah, right. It was already figured out a long time ago. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, it just seems, and it's part of the advance of the neo-feudalism, right? They're just stealing our money from the Americans, from the Europeans,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and just what you mentioned earlier, where there's only two classes now, basically, and I still can't understand. I had Ritter on the podcast some years back, but people like that, I checked this Telegram feed.
He's a spook.
Yeah, I checked his Telegram feed the other day. A spook for the Russians, or I checked his feed, and it's like, it's the same rhetoric from 2 years ago, and it's just like the Russia's gonna win. They're come in, and it's like, but we can now go back and see that it hasn't been accurate. Their assessments. When you say he's a spook for the Russians, or who?
No, I mean, I think he works for the Russians now, but before that, he was a spook for the Americans. I mean,
Right.
everything. Listen, all these people who pretend that Russia's putting up a fight are working for American narrative interests. Or, I mean, not like the American people, but Washington's narrative interest, because it's in Washington's interest to portray Russia as this Duganite fascist empire of evil, and they need all the money and moral whatever fortitude that they can to defend the plucky rebels of Ukraine. They need that. The real story is that they put these people in charge, just like they put Saddam in charge, just like they put the mullahs in charge in Iran. Okay, the world has been consolidated long before we were born, and they don't want people to understand that this is so as long as there's these people who drum up this narrative, and it doesn't matter what side of the narrative they take, right? You and I aren't part of that narrative. We're not trying to say that this is a great cosmic like if you're pro-Ukraine or you're pro-Russia, you're still like saying the same thing, that this is like a serious conflict with like serious stakes, and that it's real, and there's like a great moral drama being played out. And so you kind of need both of these actors to play their role, don't you? Like you need the one side saying that they're for everything good and fluffy and white, and the other side saying that they're for everything good and fluffy and cozy or whatever. It wouldn't work if there were people just like us who were saying, well, you see, there's this oligarch who named Patrushev, who's actually the FSB spook, and he owns a lot of agriculture through his son, because he took out a big loan and he bought up a bunch of agricultural holdings in Russia, which is why he won't ever bomb these particular targets, because he needs them to export his grain, which is why he cut a deal with Turkey and Kiev to allow them to export weapons and import weapons into Ukraine in exchange for him being able to export his agricultural products to the worldwide market and avoid the sanctions. And that is why the bombing campaigns in Odessa are so strange. Like, you're not allowed to say that. No, it's all about Darth Vader versus I don't know, Ray, what's her name, Mary Sue. That's the whole thing. You see, like, if you step outside of that paradigm of good versus evil, of like, okay, look, there's a little bit more nuance here, and I think that's important to understand.
Yeah, people just don't get it, but there are people who do get it, who listen to this Rebel transmission. Real quick, I noticed out in Georgia again, there's a party, Rose Revolution 2.0, and just in the context of what you're saying, what you've laid out here, it just seems like it's this one, let's call it whatever, EU Western globalist faction that's just trying to gain more foothold or territory for its empire versus the, seems like receding in some ways, Russian Eurasian empire. But I don't know if you've looked at into that, but just off the cuff, any reaction to what you think? There's a guy that I follow, and he just, let me just pull this up real quick. He works for Rand. He was a former ambassador, and I like to follow. I disagree with him, but where is it? He just openly made a statement that was so incredible. Here it is. William Courtney. He says, and he's showing a photo of these protests now in Georgia, and he says, preserving Ukraine's democracy required 2 color revolutions: 2004 Orange Revolution, Maidan, The same may be true for Georgia. So he's like openly saying, any thoughts on what's the game?
Well, what you see, they speak a different language, and it's like an occult language. It's a hidden language. Proletariat doesn't mean what it doesn't mean a worker in overalls. Okay, democracy does not mean going to vote every 4 years. What they mean by democracy is basic democratic institutions or liberal institutions, and it's actually the complete opposite of what it means. It means that there are these checks and safeguards against the will of the people. So there's nothing that they fear more than the majority getting its way. That's not democracy. That's totalitarianism. The way they put that's authoritarianism. Actually, that's fascism. If the majority gets its way, thus you need all these institutions in place to make sure that the will of the people is never enacted, because the people are always wrong, because the elites, the shadow elite, are the ones who know best. Thus, a democracy is when the Democrats are in control. And who are the Democrats? It's these unelected officials. So the media is a democratic institution. So for a country to be considered democratic, it must mean that the media is under control of these agents, these operatives, these democracy spooks. Then you need to make sure that there are ways to count the votes in ways that are amenable to you. So you need to make sure that you control the whole, the picking of candidates, who gets to be allowed to run or not. In Russia, you have a wonderful democracy as well. I know people who have tried to run for office. I know someone who's running for office now in St. Petersburg. And to even be allowed to run, you have to secure the support of members of a committee to even be approved to be on like the ballot for like the city elections or something like that. That's democracy in action right there. That's an institution that stands between the people and their will getting enacted. That's what they want. So when they talk about, we had to build democracy in Ukraine, what do they mean by that? Like, Ukraine's always had elections. I mean, that's not the problem. The problem is that they need more control over the elections. They need more control over the media. They need to control the finances. They need to control the companies. They need to make sure that there's an understanding, an understanding with the business world, sort of like what exists in Russia, where businessmen understand that they're not allowed to break the rules and they're not allowed to do whatever they want in terms of politics, that there's this clear divide. So in theory, I mean, businessmen who have all the money should be able to just sort of, basically democracy just means whoever has the most money can win in theory, right? Because you can buy the most amount of advertisements, you can bribe the most amount of voters. But what it actually means is that the spooks, most of the candidates that we get are basically spook actors. I mean, literally, it's just like minor or middling functionaries or something that are then supported by oligarchs. And you have to create this system. You have to create these talent agencies, as it were. Like a lot of work picking politicians is done through basically acting or talent scouts, and there's a whole infrastructure behind that. There's like people who scout out like literally within the population, people who look a certain way, speak a certain way, are malleable, and they'll be like, that's the perfect, it's like the Manchurian Candidate or something like that. It really does happen. There's like plenty of documented instances where look at every single conservative pundit in, say, America, and like, or even not even conservative, like for example, Hinkle, like Jonathan Hinkle, I think his name is Jackson Hinkle. I forget. Jackson, yeah. Who was he before he was 21, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he's getting interviews with Lavrov, with Shapiro, with all these top Russian officials. I mean, like one stop away from talking to Putin himself. How does he get to that? Some 21-year-old nobody. How? Well, he was an actor. He was literally at a talent agency, and he was this hardcore SJW, and he was literally hired. There's this guy in Moscow, I forget his name, who contracted with this talent agency in America, and they hired out Hinkle to them, and all of a sudden Hinkle transforms himself into this sort of like star and sickle, Red Star, like pro-Putin guy, and his views are maybe not 180 degrees different than what they were before he was hired, but they're significantly different, and they're exactly what the views of the spook state in Russia are. They're not what the views of the Russians people are, but it's very much an FSB approved narrative. This is who was, you go down the list, former porn stars, for Christ's sakes, like this Mindy Robinson, a conservative influencer. This Hanania had an interview recently where he spoke to some OnlyFans model, and she was getting paid by the Biden administration to put out pro-Biden, and so that's how it works.
Yeah, I mean,
this is all part of democracy.
Yeah,
this is what democracy means.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. I mean, I do think when you mentioned the former porn star, I think people can out. There's always room for redemption. But just what you're saying, it's like Hinkle, and then you just go down the line. Candace Owens, I read somewhere that she was in some talent agency.
She was an actress.
Right, and it's just like,
and she married a prominent, powerful guy with Israeli connections, and which is kind of strange. What was the name of Michelle Malkin before her? All of them. Like, just look at it. Just go down the list.
I mean, Candace is a bit more, I think, compared to the others, maybe more intelligent, but it's just kind of bothersome as you lay out that some of these people have these massive followings and they're not having the level of discussion that we are, and whatever. But how do you think?
It's the same in Russia. It's the same in Russia. I swear to God. Like, I was supposed to talk to this one guy who was dating. I don't want to say, he was dating the daughter of a top official. Let's just put it that way. And his whole goal was to get the green light to become a public personality. And he wanted to go into politics. He wanted to become like a figure. And so he was trying to get in good with these people. And to prepare for that, he started an acting career as a traveling food guy. Like those food programs where kind of like, you know what I'm talking about. And so he was doing that. But then he recently found out that no, he wasn't going to get the green light. And now he's really upset. And I was hoping to secure an interview with him where he would spill some of the beans about what's going on. But that's how the system's built, like that's what democracy is. Like, this is integral. It's not just random people. Anyway, but to just get, you were asking about Georgia and protests and how that all works. Another great example is what's happening in America with these Israel protests. And a lot of these groups that are involved in it, they seem to be run by the Israelis themselves. Like, a lot of these groups, you look into it a little bit and it's like, oh, well, this is not a Palestinian group. And so some of the stuff that they do, it seems kind of discrediting. It seems kind of like designed to make people hate them, and they direct the discussion and they make it weird. So they say, like, Palestine has to be free so that the transgenders can be free. Is that really what, like, a Palestinian living in, what is it, in Rafah or whatever, is that really what's on their mind? Is that really the voice of, like, the Palestinian cause and that of people getting bombed in Gaza? I don't think so. And yet it's bizarrely front and center at a lot of these protests. And then recently you have, again, what looks to be like Antifa storming this some sort of school building and occupying it. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of strange. Well, I mean, now the police can come in and crack some skulls, right? And a lot of it is like that in Georgia as well, because if you look at the actual people involved in it, the Russians basically fund criminals, as always. Like, they'll find some oligarch criminal, most usually an Israeli, and then the Americans will fund some charismatic looking puppet with like middling connections or whatever. What was his name? Saakashvili. Before that, his wife was an American CIA agent, right? And she was like, I think she was like a model or something before, or was she an actress? Anyway, so yeah, he was in. I met him in DC. Actually, I was in DC at the time, and I met Saakashvili and his wife, and they spent a lot of time in Washington. And my parents said that they saw him at the Costco. So anyway, yeah. I don't think we have enough time to get into the details of the Georgia, but Riley, I think, knows a lot about the Georgia thing. But again, it's pantomime, it's theater, and there are a lot of people, unfortunately, that get wrapped up into it. Young students who don't know anything about anything, that are just passionate about whatever, they'll get roped into it. That's what we see happening in America with these idiot students getting involved. The cause somewhat justified. I think everyone's appalled by what's happening in Israel, just like in Georgia. There's a lot to protest about, to be fair. But I think we should. My main message is that I think peasants should stay out of politics, because we're just perpetuating an illusion. We don't have any power. We are not. Our opinions do not count. Thus, we shouldn't be throwing ourselves we shouldn't be eager to support this system. Like, we shouldn't be eager to be foot soldiers in somebody's inter-oligarchic spat. We shouldn't be eager foot soldiers of some spook agenda or the other. If they want to do that and we can't stop them, let them do that, but without me, without us. I don't want to get into a dispute with a fellow peasant over nonsense, which was cooked up in some think tank or whatever. I don't want to be divisioned or to basically have a conflict in the family or with my friends over stuff that's completely contrived. At the end of the day, a lot of us are in the same boat, and we should realize that at some point and stop getting involved in all these emotional psyops and everything. And that's kind of the main message I have for the Ukrainian and the Russian people, and for people watching this conflict there. It's that, look, a lot of it is fake. The killing is very real. The massacres are very real, but the actual reasoning behind the war, the explanations, the justification, the moral narrative that we're being told, that's totally fake. And what we should do is we should close ranks around ourselves. We really are one people, and the elites on either side are purposefully butchering us. If it's the Russian side, they're purposefully losing this war and making sure to extend it and making sure that more and more people get killed. And they did everything in their power to lose Ukraine and to kill anybody who was pro-Russian in Donbass, and to help the SBU kill anybody who was pro-Russian in Ukraine. The FSB is treacherous. It's an occupation government in Russia. And that's basically my main message. I don't know.
No,
I get kind of bummed even saying it.
No, but I'm coming to that same conclusion, although from my own even biblical Christian perspective, that I don't even believe in democracy anymore. And I'm reading some stuff where it's a civil religion. I think it's actually an occult. This idea of democracy, progressivism. That it's in fact it's not what it's been sold to us as. It's itself. It's this sort of occult type of religion, and most people we're not taught that. And I'm like, that is fascinating, and it's a sham. We don't have the democracy, or maybe we do, but it's not what we think it is. And I don't want to have anything to do with it. And so they're going to do what they're going to do, and I'm just going to enjoy my little simple life, getting on with enjoying the small things, enjoying the things that I want to enjoy. And I one of my listeners on Twitter, I was posting some of the crazy stories of the technocracy that's developing. The EU is, as I put it, the EU is financing the one ring to rule them all. This global digital ID. Basically, they're financing these companies that are going out with other companies to create an interoperable digital ID. And I'm thinking, like, okay, I didn't vote for that. Basically, it's businessmen who get together in a room with politicians and scheme, and then do what they want, and then they let us know about it, what they're doing, and they never consulted anyone, and they're just going, creating these global digital cattle tags for everyone, and then they call that democracy. And it's just like, okay.
And if you're against that, you're anti-democracy. Yeah, it's like it's brand capture. But here's the thing: is that on some level, what's happening? Even it's the same thing as with like automation. It's that they want to actually reduce the ruling elite. Like, they want to make it so that smaller group of people, a more select elite group of people, runs everything, and they think that technology can help them do that. So these surveillance systems, AI, can basically allow an even smaller group than was traditionally necessary to rule over more people, using technology to leverage. as it were, their power. And that is really going to be the source of all the conflicts that will come in the near future. It's that a lot of the elite is going to feel that they're about to be made redundant, and they're about to be reduced in rank and privilege. And they might put up a fight about that. And they're going to try and make it seem all about like morals or whatever. They're going to try. And there are, even now in the West, it's not totalitarian in the sense, like it's not a monolith. There is a difference between the Silicon Valley people and the more traditional Wall Street sort of Washington people. There is tension between Brussels and Washington. And, none of these guys are the good guys. There's no morality nonsense to be spoken of here. But there is a potential for conflict, and I do think that there is potential for like if we had smart people who understood the nature of the game, perhaps there could be ways to leverage this to the common man's benefit, in the sense that, like, okay, well, if the elites are going to fight, that means that they need to enlist some of us in their fight. And if they need us, perhaps we have some bargaining power. Perhaps we could make a deal. Okay, fine, we'll help you fight, but stop feeding us bugs. We want to eat meat again. Okay. Help me defeat these guys. And that's politics. I mean, that's something that we can talk about. Who is gonna let me eat my meat in peace if I eliminate the other guy? Okay, that other stuff about morality, you have to forget it. I mean, that's good for talking to your neighbors or whatever. Not good for understanding why there's a war in Ukraine, or why there's this push for a global technocratic surveillance state. Okay, so
we have to be we got to be pragmatists here. And the good news is that Lukashenko is learning to love the bomb. It was reported that Lukashenko has revealed he once got up close and personal with a strategic nuclear warhead and actually hugged it. So that's all you got to do. Stop worrying, learn how to love either the bomb or the algorithm ghetto, the digital gulag, and all that. We went into overdrive here. I'm experimenting with longer podcasts. People can let me know. They like I got 30-minute, 1 hour, 2 hour podcasts, and wherever you're listening to this, send me a message, leave me a comment, and and any final thought, Rurik, and then let us know again where we can find you, your projects and whatnot.
Well, thanks for talking to me. I think we covered a really, really impressively wide range of topics. In my mind, they're all linked. I don't know about you, but I think they're all linked. So we talked about Texas's killing, its cover up, and the silence. I think that the main thing I really want people to do is just start telling the truth, for Christ's sakes. Just start. If people have all these hangups and they're like, is it moral? Is it from my team? Is it from my side? Does it conflict with my ideology? And it's just like, look, you got to leave all that behind. You just got to start saying the truth as you see it. Try and get these little victories, like every single time you tell the truth, you wound 1,000 lies. That's just start telling the truth, even if it makes your side supposedly. I don't think there is a your side. I think you're deluded about that. There's nothing wrong or immoral about demanding that the killers of Texas and all the other slain heroes of Donbass that they be called to justice, that they be given their day in court or whatever. This is insanity. I can't believe that. I mean, nobody will talk to me about this. This is how. Do you understand? Like, I mean, this is exactly what the elite want. Like, they can kill. One side can kill the other side because they're the bad guys, and then the other side can kill the other side because they're the bad guys. And each side, and the peasants on both sides think, oh, I can't say anything. Oh, I'm supposed to support it, or you know what I mean? Like they play these games, but at the end of the day, all they're doing is just killing anybody that speaks the truth in any capacity. That's the only side that I see. People that try to tell the truth in some way to the best extent that they can, and people who perpetuate the system of lies. That's it. So pick your sides. That's my final thought. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you get boosted if you're a Hinkle multipolarista or a pro-NATO account, but if you're neither of those, we are little voices in the wilderness here. Yeah. All right, until next time, Rurik. I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast. The website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and I encourage you to sign up for the free email list that goes out with each podcast and every weekend with a collection of news headlines. The newsletter and website are our last lines of defense. We're being censored and deplatformed. It's nearly impossible to find Geopolitics and Empire on the Google search engine. We've been blacklisted. YouTube frequently takes down our videos with strikes. Facebook restricts our page. Reddit and Twitter take down posts. And after the Associated Press mentioned Geopolitics and Empire in a 2021 article co-written with NATO, our Patreon account was terminated. Vimeo also terminated our Pro account. The best free way to help Geopolitics and Empire is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or elsewhere and subscribe to all of our media channels. You can find the video broadcast now on 5 platforms: Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble, BitChute, and Brighteon. You can find the audio broadcast on the podcast ecosystem: SoundCloud, Apple, Spotify, and so on. My current favorite social media channels are Twitter and Telegram, but you can also find us on Gab, MeWe, Minds, Float, VK, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Finally, Geopolitics and Empire is in dire need of funding to continue. You can leave a donation, purchase a consultation with the host, or become a member to receive additional benefits. We also produce a weekly broadcast called Dissident Thinker for members and Rockfin subscribers only. We will continue to fight the good fight come hell or high water. Thank you for listening.